Welcome to Conversations with Kay. I'm Kay Ryder, and every week I talk with Vermonters who are leaders in the fields of government, healthcare, education, the arts, and community life. My guest is Lori Fisher, who is the Executive Director of the Lake Champlain Committee, and I want to also welcome people from 99.3 FM, WVBTV LP. Welcome, Lori.
Thank you, Kay. Delighted to be back here.
Nice to have you back. How long have you been the Executive Director of the Lake Champlain Committee?
Since about 1987, so good long
long run.
Yes.
Well, that's a good long run. Now, the Lake Champlain Committee is over 50 years old.
Yes.
What is its goal? Has its goal changed, or is it still the same?
Well, our mission is to protect the lake's health and its accessibility. So we use science-based advocacy, education, and collaborative action to safeguard natural habitats, protect and improve water quality, promote access, and also foster stewardship to try and stimulate public engagement.
Well, I like the idea of having it for natural beauty, in its health, and so people can get there. I like those two goals. I think they're what it should be all about.
Right.
Now, there are so many threats to the health of Lake Champlain, but let's start out by talking about microfibers. What are microfibers?
Microfibers are actually these little fibers associated with our clothing that get collected when you wash your clothes, and they go through our sewage treatment facilities. Basically, sewage treatment facilities were designed to treat sewage, and a lot of things in our modern day life we're finding are getting into our waterways, and microfibers are just one of those things. There's the microplastics. The microfibers are just like small threads, and some of them are plastic from fleece, etc., that again are washing into our waterways and collecting there, and certainly are starting to be recognized as a much more significant issue than anybody ever thought.
Of course, everybody in Vermont wears microfleece, so there you go. But you mentioned what was it?
Microplastics.
Right.
And some of the microplastics that people are probably somewhat familiar with are microbeads, which are very tiny little plastic spheres that were put in personal care products to exfoliate. They were also used in toothpaste. Now, the Lake Champlain Committee was part of an effort to get them banned, and that was successful, but they're still not all off the shelves. So we've been working just to raise awareness to read your product labels and also be part of that contingent that's really advocating for really thoughtful manufacturing and thinking about what are the impacts of these new products we're bringing to market. There's no reason that we need microbeads in our personal care products. They existed for years without. And there are plenty of benign natural products that can have that same exfoliating benefit. Everything from ground apricot and walnut shells to oatmeal, salt. There are a whole host of things that are much more benign that had been used in the past. And
what do we look for when we look on a label for the microbeads?
So you want to look in the inactive ingredients list for things like anything that says poly on it. Polyolefin. There's the poly prefix is sort of a hint of potential microplastics in it. They are being moved off the shelves, and again, they're not supposed to be manufactured any longer, and most of the big personal care products have already replaced them, but you still want to be looking for that.
Okay, well, good job that you worked on that. That's very good. Now, how do you wash your clothes or deal with dry cleaning or whatever to avoid the microfibers getting into the lake?
Well, that's still in the research phase. I think there's an organization called the Rosalia Project that is actually Vermont-based. A woman by the name of Rachel Miller is spearheading an effort to refine a ball that you would put in your washing machine that actually will collect the fibers. So stay tuned on that. We'll certainly be publishing more information about it. In our a recent Lake Champlain Committee e-newsletter, you can find more about microfibers in that article and just how ubiquitous they are. And we're still in the stage of trying to figure out how do we reduce that impact and remove them and ensure that they don't get into our waterways in the first place, because they're certainly not something healthy for the ecosystem or something that we want our fish to be depending upon for a diet.
Right. Well, I'm talking to Lori Fisher, who's the executive director of the Lake Champlain Committee. Are the trains still carrying oil through Vermont?
Not so much through Vermont, but on the train, the issue with the oil transport of Bakken oil primarily is on the New York side, on the train tracks that really hug the shoreline. So the Lake Champlain Committee has been a very vocal opponent of that oil transport, calling for a moratorium until cars are upgraded and we have a much better plan for dealing with things. We feel like we're very, very vulnerable for any sort of spill, and spills have been happening all across the country. The flow has somewhat diminished, but there's still plenty of oil being transported, and there's a vulnerability not only for the water quality, but also for those communities that are so close to the tracks.
Has work been done with these communities to try to train them if something does happen? Or
yes, certainly, and there's been a renewed focus in terms of emergency response, but the reality is we're very far away from the points where you would have a lot of the equipment, and the emergency response is highly dependent upon also a volunteer network. And there have been training sessions ongoing. There's an effort by the part of the Environmental Protection Agency and partner agencies, the Coast Guard, et cetera, to upgrade emergency response plans. But if there were a spill, it would be absolutely devastating for this region. And we feel that it's sort of a ticking time bomb when you look at the frequency of traffic, what's been happening nationwide. So we're really still trying to raise awareness about this issue and work with our congressional delegation, as well as partner with other communities across the country that are also facing similar threats.
that stretch of New York State on the lake is, well, thank God, it's pretty wild, and they've tried to keep it that way, not like Vermont, which is really pretty settled. And but those communities there are very, very small, and
yes.
They would have volunteer people and the firemen and the police force and all that. It would be really dire if something happened. So I'm glad that you're still working on that. I wish you lots of luck, and of course you have New York State and Quebec and Vermont involved in this.
Yes, and the Lake Champlain Committee, since our founding over 50 years ago, we've always been a bi-state organization, and we've also always taken a watershed approach. So we really look at Lake Champlain also from a perspective of a whole watershed, because it's really the land base around Lake Champlain that influences the water quality dramatically. And so we've tried to bring that perspective, and we work in New York, Vermont, and Quebec as well.
Now, what is an invasive species?
So an invasive species, in general, we focus on invasive species and Lake Champlain, we're focused on the aquatic invasive species that outcompete the natives that are not native to the region, and in many cases they have gotten out of hand. And so we have over 50 in Lake Champlain, unfortunately, in the Lake Champlain watershed. We're trying to really do preventative actions to avoid that number getting any larger. But this is also reflective of Lake Champlain being connected to inland waterways. So the Hudson has about twice as many invasive species as Lake Champlain, and the Great Lakes, which we're also connected to through the inland waterways system, has 4 times as many species. So our organization is focused on keeping more invasives out through preventative actions, everything from raising awareness. There are boat stewards at our boat launch areas that are overseen through a program that the Lake Champlain Basin Program runs to educate boaters about avoiding transport. So you want to make sure that you're cleaning, drying, and ensuring that anything you transport from one bay to another or one waterway to another isn't taking along these hitchhikers, which can be microscopic in their, depending upon what phase of life they're in. But invasives also are generally characterized by this highly adaptable approach to living in water, and also extremely aggressive. They can reproduce often exponentially, so they outcompete the natives and can really change an ecosystem over time, and probably have had the most significant ecosystem effect on Lake Champlain than anything else.
Now we have animal invasive species and plant invasive species, right?
We do, and and our organization is focused on both of them. We actually have a monitoring program that's been going on for several years in the summer, where we're actually trying to map and inventory as well as eradicate invasives the vegetative invasives that we're finding, primarily focused on water chestnut, which is the bane of part of the South Lake, has been found, though, in some restricted places in the northern part of the lake. Last year we found a feeder population on Black Creek in St. Albans. So we're actually going to be, this coming Friday, we're going to be part of a team of organizations and agencies working together to try and eradicate that population so it won't creep in to St. Albans Bay.
I'm talking with Lori Fisher, who's the executive director of the Lake Champlain Committee. Invasive species, they don't have natural enemies. Is that part of the problem too?
Yeah, in general, and when the invaders come in, like for instance, certain species may be native to salt water, but now they're in fresh water, and they just, they don't have, in general, a natural predator, so nothing can keep them contained in the way that ecosystem functions naturally. So we have things like alewife, who have kind of taken over from smelt as the forage base in Lake Champlain. There are implications from that, because they can trigger a weakness in the ability of lake trout that are now eating them to process thiamine, so that weakens the reproduction. So there are these cascading effects, a domino effect often, from these invasive species. Zebra mussels, which came in the early 1990s, actually were discovered by a citizen scientist, a young boy at the time, who had been alerted by education and outreach efforts. He was the person who first found zebra mussels in the South Lake, helped identify it, and now they're pretty much have colonized in shallow water areas. So definitely affect lake use and clog pipes. They colonize on rocks and on docks and on the boat bottoms, etc. Have affected things like our fish hatchery in their intake pipes, and it's a big management issue now. That's another challenge with invasives. Once they get established, it's very hard to eradicate them. So the best thing is preventative efforts to keep them out in the first place. And that's also why we're very focused on the southern canal system, the Champlain Canal, because of the invasive species that have gotten into Lake Champlain, whose origin we know about, the vast majority have come through the canal system. So we're really pushing to see some sort of focus on the Southern Canal and how we might have a barrier system or some sort of barrier dam to keep more invasives out.
Now, has Senator Leahy been active in helping you on this issue with the canal?
It certainly has. Senator Leahy has secured funding for a barrier study, a feasibility study, which should be getting underway fairly soon. And he's been a longtime advocate, not just on invasive species, but on the lake as a whole. I think that's one of the things that is very much a part of Senator Leahy's legacy is championing Lake Champlain. And he has been, throughout his career, a real force for that. So one of the reasons we have the Lake Champlain Basin Program in place, the Basin Program focuses on this collaborative action to protect and restore Lake Champlain. Senator Leahy was instrumental in that federal Lake Champlain Special Designation Act passing and getting money to Lake Champlain for research, monitoring, pollution prevention, education, really making sure that we steward this incredible resource.
And the Basin Program is New York State, Vermont, and Quebec.
Yeah, it's really a federal initiative, but it includes Quebec as well. So there's a memorandum of understanding amongst Vermont, New York, and Quebec that helps trigger Quebec's involvement as well.
Well, let's talk about the old problem, blue algae.
Oh yeah, cyanobacteria is sort of a scientific name for that, and triggered in part by nutrient loading, and has been a significant problem, particularly in St. Albans Bay and Missisquoi Bay on Lake Champlain, but really can be seen throughout. The Lake Champlain Committee runs a citizen monitoring program, so we have over 100 sites and about over 130 monitors that we train, support, and provide guidance to throughout the summer, who assess water at least on a weekly basis on Lake Champlain and several inland lakes within the watershed and in Vermont statewide. And we provide all the support for that. That information is gathered and then goes up on a website that's housed at the Vermont Department of Health and accessible to anybody with an internet connection. So you can go on and see a data tracker you can put in the lake section you're interested in or a specific lake, and you'll get a menu and a graphic of that section of the lake or your particular water body, and you can find out what the status is and when that visual alert was taken. We also do some water sampling with our monitors and partner with state environmental and health agencies to gather this information. It's probably the most robust monitoring program, cyanobacteria monitoring program in the country, because we're monitoring not only for when those blooms are happening, but also presence and absence. So we have a much better picture of the lake, and we have this great geographic range.
And that's a very impressive volunteer effort.
It is. And the volunteers are what make this program work. I can't stress that enough. And in my eyes, it's a really good public-private partnership, because Lake Champlain is the greatest public resource, the largest public resource that most of us collectively own. We are its stewards. We are responsible for its health, and its condition really reflects our values. The cyanobacteria monitoring program is a great way to get involved, and we would not have that coverage, we would not have all this information gathered without the vital network of citizen volunteers who are wonderfully dedicated and go through training every year. And during times when there are blooms, they're trying to monitor on a daily basis, not just weekly. So it's great reporting and totally dependent upon this citizen stewardship.
Now, I'm talking with Lori Fisher, who's the Executive Director of the Lake Champlain Committee. Where would someone call, or I know you have a good website, to find out more information about the Lake Champlain Committee?
So our phone number is 802-658-1414, and our website is just lakechamplaincommittee.org. So if you can remember our name, you can get to our website.
Okay. Now, all is not problems. I mean, we have some fun on the lake, and we all love to enjoy the lake. And as you said, it's a great resource for all of us. Tell us about the paddle trails.
Yeah, the Lake Champlain Committee established the Lake Champlain Paddlers Trail back in 1996 with the intent of providing a low-impact, safe recreational corridor for human-powered craft. We want to make sure that on Lake Champlain, which takes all kinds of uses, that there's always an opportunity for people to experience big water and the wild aspects of the lake under their own power.
Kayaks.
Yes, kayaks and canoes, sailboats, etc. And so we established the trail. We now have 41 trail locations, public and private land. Some are municipal sites, some are state-owned, and some are privately held. They're on the New York and Vermont shorelines and islands, and they provide access to nearly 600 campsites. So people can use them for day paddles or more of a discovery voyage going end to end. We have end-to-end paddlers. We produce an annual guidebook that gives some stewardship guidance, as well as has chartlets and descriptions for all the sites in the system, how you would access them, and who you call to make a reservation, what fee systems are in place. Some are free, some have a fee. It's variable.
Hold up your little sign there. That's
yes,
pretty.
And the sites are signed with this relatively small Lake Champlain Paddlers Trail site location sign. Getting to a site is also a process of discovery too, so you're not going to find a big billboard there. Getting the annual guidebook, which is available through membership in the Lake Champlain Committee.
Can you get the guidebook if you aren't a member?
No, and that's because, so this is the annual guidebook. This is our 2017 version. The trail would not exist without an organization behind it, and it's also really critical to our partnerships with whether they're state agencies or municipalities. They really want, and we want as well, people who are going to use the trail to get instruction on safety and stewardship, because that's a big part of using the lake. We want you to use it in a way that you're not going to have a negative impact on the resource.
Well, that makes a lot of sense to me. Definitely, absolutely.
Great, and
now,
you've been a big advocate of the trail over the years,
yes,
so thank
yes,
you.
yes. For kayakers, it's just a wonderful thing. It's so quiet when you kayak. I mean, it's just a marvelous experience. And you can go places with a kayak that you can't with other boats.
Absolutely,
So
yeah. And we're actually, in terms of our water chestnut harvesting, we're actually often getting into places with a kayak or a canoe and, harvesting these invasive species too. So
great.
Do that.
Yeah, you can have fun and do good at the same time.
Absolutely, yes.
Let's talk about, all these problems sound very big, but there are things we ourselves can do to help assure that the lake will be around for a long time. Obviously, phosphorus is a problem in the lake. Now, what can we do about that?
Well, several things, and certainly at an individual level, we want to really be responsive to how we're stewarding our own, backyards. So there are bans for use of phosphorus on lawn fertilizer. You're not allowed to use phosphorus on lawn fertilizer unless you take a soil test that shows that your soil actually needs it. But there aren't police out there at your garden centers, so it's really self-monitoring. And so, there are many actions you can take to reduce your nutrient loading, thinking about how water stays on your property if you're a homeowner, making sure it doesn't run off, things like rain gardens, having rain barrels, collecting that, making sure you have gutters, you collect your runoff so that it's not going into our waterways and carrying more phosphorus with us. Because that's one of the triggers for cyanobacteria, certainly.
Right, yes, yes. And if you have leaky pipes, it sounds ridiculous. The lake is huge, but it's not going to, if everybody had leaky pipes, that would go down, I guess, probably.
Yeah, and a big thing, I think, for everybody is to be an advocate for investing in our waterways. As a nation, as a state, as a region, we really haven't done that. I think there's an assumption that you should turn on the tap or take a shower and clean water should always come out, but that we don't really have to invest in it. It very much is a capital investment, and we're struggling right now to really decide what avenue, what way we should invest. I think as citizens who value the lake, I mean, we can't live without water, and we have to recognize that it's a capital investment we need to make, and it's part of a productive civil society to have healthy water. And so we need to let our legislators know, our congressional delegation, our gubernatorial representatives know we want to see investments in water, because public health, economic health, the vitality of our communities are very much dependent on it. In these past few weeks when we've had such heavy rainfalls with so much overflow going on it, we have an aging infrastructure of pipes for whether it's for drinking water or sewage treatment, wastewater treatment across the country. We're no exception in the Lake Champlain watershed. We need to make those investments, and we need to think about how we protect this waterway, how we invest not only in our wastewater structure, but also stormwater, and how we have strong regulations for agriculture and other inputs into our waterways.
I'm talking with Lori Fisher, who's the executive director of the Lake Champlain Committee. Now, we can do certain things, but we all know that when it comes to funding and leadership, a lot of it comes from the feds. And the Trump administration does not support programs to deal with climate change or global warming. It doesn't exist, I guess. They don't like science. How do you think over a period of time, if we had 8 years of a Trump administration, with this lack of funding, how will it affect all these issues in Lake Champlain?
Well, absolutely devastating. In terms of the federal budget that's being proposed by the Trump administration, really has a negative effect on water protection. I mean, they are cutting the Environmental Protection Agency's budget by over 30%. They're taking the biggest hit, I think, of any agency. They are taking away 40% of the Environmental Protection Agency's enforcement powers. They have put in place an administrator of that agency that does not believe in the mission of the agency. That is a draconian move, as are the budget proposals. They are also wiping out the geographic waters programs, not only for Lake Champlain, but across the nation. All of those are zero funded in the current federal budget. But what we have to remember is that the administration proposes the budget, but Congress adopts it. So we have to get the message out there. And our congressional delegation is working very hard on that. But all of us are part of a national network where we have friends and relatives across the country. We have to get them to advocate as well.
We have to do our part.
Absolutely.
To make sure that Lake Champlain stays healthy and beautiful. Thank you for coming, Lori.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Conversations with Kay.